The Woman King. This movie is an ironic contradiction in more ways than one. I mean, not the least of which being that you got a white woman privileged by dominant society who's telling a black woman's story. Black woman, underprivileged, actually a target, especially if you talk about her men and her children. But I digress. A target for death, campaigns. But you got a white woman telling this black woman's story, and the obvious disconnect is that the white woman lionizes a slave trading society, the Dahomey, a society that helped lay the bloody groundwork upon which that white woman's own privileged society was built. And, oh, wait, I guess it's not too ironic that she would want to lionize and make heroes out of that society. I digress. Well, I want you to think about it. And I got some questions. Stand by. Masculinity and the black woman. First question is, why when it comes to quintessential masculinity, that is to say, being warlike, having muscles, killing people, killing other men, having aggression, testosterone, these are all quintessential traits of toxic masculinity. Why is it that these become all of a sudden hallmarks of virtue and empowerment, when these same attributes are thrust upon black women by mainstream society? I'll wait. And why then, when it comes to white female empowerment, as exhibited by mainstream media, by contrast, the white female icons tend to maintain a crucial essence of femininity in the majority of the cases. That is to say, they're softer in appearance. They are not typically running around grunting and hollering. Their go-to plan is typically not physical aggression. The hallmarks of having a lot of testosterone. Exhibit number one, Wonder Woman, the Phoenix, Captain Marvel, and She-Hulk, dare I say. Though the same ultraviolet traits as ascribed to the toxic masculinity may apply to them, if you notice, the women appear softer. And they're not shaved typically, if you notice. I'll wait. Also, I ask you, why does the proliferation of white female empowerment not require or depend upon the annihilation of the body or spirit or image of the white male in general? Not to the degree to which black female empowerment seems to. I mean, when you see black female empowered characters, it tends to go hand in hand with the shaming or actual death of the black male. It's almost like a replacement of him, as in making a woman king, for example, instead of a queen without a king. Wakanda forever. Anybody? Built on the body of the black man and showing the woman, rise in his stead. Often the story of the black woman empowerment seems to the antagonist of that story, or at least something central to the plot requires a mister of the color purple. That fictional Negro from the Harriet movie or the swaths of Negroes in whose blood the women must bathe whilst cutting her own path to greatness. It has to be over his dead body, right? No pun intended. Lastly, I'd say that the woman king itself is an oxymoron. What's in a name, you might ask? Or I ask you, why woman king? Besides just some clever marketing ploy or play on words, why woman king? Is Viola Davis an actress? Why don't we just call her a woman actor? Even in the absence of a leading man, no pun intended, she is defined as an actress, her own leading woman, as it were, at one time, and not automatically a woman male actor. You see, just because there's no leading man, it doesn't make her a leading man. It doesn't change her, or it doesn't change the reference to her from actress to actor. Not in a physiological sense, at least. I know there are many that will debate that nowadays, but if we want to defer to the obvious, if Viola Davis was in a movie with Denzel Washington, the sudden death of Denzel Washington as the leading man does not make Viola Davis a Denzel Washington. It makes her a Viola Davis without Denzel Washington. But I digress. Unless, of course, you can call her an actor or a king if the goal is not to establish Viola as a competent actress in her own right, but to replace the role of the male actor himself, abandoning her own place. Think about it. Kingdom of Dahomey. In modern times, Beninese political leaders have drawn inspiration and legitimacy from the old Dahomey kings and the mythology that surrounds them. One recurring example is the Calabi's Toure, King Gueso's metaphor for state power, a gourd with many holes in it, which can only remain effective if all the people of the kingdom contribute to holding it together. However, this image of popular solidarity contrasts sharply with the spectacular brutality with which Gueso and the other kings of Dahomey actually ruled. For hundreds of years, Dahomey was essentially a military dictatorship supported by the profits of the slave trade and legitimized by the king's mystical claims to divine power. As Louis XIV, the king embodied in the state, and he maintained order by eliminating all enemies. However, when the end of slavery in the mid-1800s removed its chief source of financing, the Dahomey kingdom began a rapid decline, which ended with the French conquest and exile of the last king, Behazin, in 1895. Ironically, the French chose to name their new colony Dahomey in honor of the destroyed kingdom. The word Dahomey means in Don's belly and is explained by the following legend, which, says Sir Richard Burton, is known, 1864, to everybody in the kingdom. Takundunu, having settled in a town called Uhwanwe, encroached on the land of a neighboring chief named Don, the snake. Takundonu wearied Don by perpetual demands for land, and the chief one day exclaimed in anger, "Soon thou wilt build in my belly." So it came to pass, Takundonu slew Dan, and over his grave built himself a palace, which was called the Homey, a name thenceforth adopted by the new king's followers. The Dahomey customs, which gave the country an infamous notoriety, appear to date from the middle of the 17th century and were of two kinds: the grand customs performed on the death of a king, and the minor customs held twice a year. Upon the death of a king, human victims were sacrificed at his grave to supply him with wives, attendants, etc. in the spirit world. The grand customs surpassed the annual rites in splendor and bloodshed. At those held in 1791 during January, February, and March, it is stated that no fewer than 500 men, women, and children were put to death. The minor customs were first heard of in Europe in the early years of the 18th century. They formed continuations of the grand customs and periodically supplied the departed monarch with fresh attendants in the shadowy world. The actual slaughter was preluded by dancing, feasting, speech-making, and elaborate ceremonial. The victims, chiefly prisoners of war, were dressed in calico shirts decorated round the neck and down the sleeves with red bindings and with crimson patch on the left breast, and wore long white nightcaps with spirals of blue ribbon sewn on. Some of them, tied in baskets, were at one stage of the proceedings taken to the top of a high platform, together with an alligator, a cat, and a hawk in similar baskets, and paraded on the heads of the Amazons. The king then made a speech explaining that the victims were sent to testify to his greatness in the spirit land, the men and the animals each to their kind. They were then hurled down into the middle of a surging crowd of natives and butchered. At another stage of the festival, human sacrifices were offered at the shrine of the king's ancestors, and the blood was sprinkled on their graves. This was known as Zan Nyanyaya, or Evil Night. The king going in procession with his wives and officials, and himself executing the doomed. These semi-public massacres formed only part of the slaughter. For many women, eunuchs, and others within the palace were done to death privately. The skulls were used to adorn the palace walls, and the king's sleeping chamber was paved with the heads of his enemies. The skulls of the conquered kings were turned into royal drinking cups, their conversion to this use being esteemed an honor. It seems that cannibalism was a sequel of the customs, the bodies of the slaughtered being roasted and devoured smoking hot. On the death of the king, the wives, after the most extravagant demonstrations of grief, broke and destroyed everything within their reach, and attacked and murdered each other, the uproar continuing until order was restored by the new sovereign. These female levies form the flower of the Homeyan army. Their number has been variously stated. Sir R.F. Burton in 1862, who saw the army marching out of Kana on an expedition, computed the whole force of the female troops at 2,500. A later writer estimated the number of Amazons at 1,000 and the male soldiers at 10,000. In truth, Giso, king of the Dahomeans, only agreed to end Dahomey's participation in the slave trade in 1852, after years of pressure by the British government, which had abolished slavery for not wholly altruistic reasons in its own colonies in 1833. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think, the good, the bad, the otherwise. And for it all, I thank ya, and I thank ya. See you next time.